Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. That was part of the Preludio from the Partita No. 3 in E major by Johann Sebastian Bach. It was a piece I played an awful lot in 2007. That year I turned 50, and I had the bright idea, well, some would say otherwise, of trying to do something which had occurred to me some 30 years beforehand. As a student, I used to, like many music students, I used to support myself by doing a little bit of busking. I could earn pocket money, sometimes actually pay for holidays doing that. And I'd said to one of my friends, I bet you could go right around the world doing this. So with my 50th birthday, I hatched the great plan. Well, it wasn't exactly a plan. It took about 2 minutes to work out what I was going to do. I was going to leave the house with a backpack, a fiddle, and a totally empty wallet, go down to my local tube station and start playing. When I'd got enough money, I'd move on to the next stop and see how I got on. I was very lucky. I had a fantastic send-off from Turnham Green Tube Station in West London. I had TV crews in attendance, loads of people turned out to wave me goodbye, or perhaps to make sure that I actually went. And I did very well, but by the time I arrived in Paris and had spent a day traipsing around some of my old student busking haunts, I discovered that it wasn't going to be quite that easy. On the second day of the trip, I arrived in Zurich. Now, this is a city I've played in quite a lot in over the years. My first stop was at the concert hall, the Turnhalle, in the city. And I thought, well, I'll go and stand outside the concert hall. I've got a self-selecting group of people that love music. They will surely recognize my great talent, and I will coin it. How wrong was I? I stood outside on the steps playing for 20 minutes, and that time had one single donation of 2 Swiss francs. I left feeling incredibly dispirited and walked down to the center of town, where I found another busking spot, which was actually quite good. The sound was good. There were people walking past, not too quickly. It was ideal. And things picked up a little bit, but I noticed something, and that was that while I was playing, people would see me from sort of maybe 50 yards away. They would walk towards me, and as they approached, the hand would go into the pocket, and of course I was expecting the wallet to be withdrawn, but instead they'd go past clutching a mobile phone to their ear. And I think what was happening was this, that they saw me, they decided that they weren't going to make any kind of contribution to my violin case. As they approached, they could perhaps hear me playing, and then they had to decide, well, am I going to change my mind or not? And they decided they weren't going to change their mind. They'd made a snap decision some maybe 2 seconds ago. Nothing was going to change that. So in order to actually make it easy, what they needed was something to shield themselves from this noise, which was so troubling. So the mobile phones came out. What surprised me was my reaction. I sort of, I felt, well, to be quite honest, I felt a little bit hurt. And it wasn't until later on that evening, when I was at the Zurich main train station waiting for the night train to Vienna, that I saw something which I was amazed by. There was a guy there. Now, the main train station is where the down and outs of Zurich tend to congregate at night, the drug addicts, alcoholics, homeless people, etc. And there was one guy there making an incredible racket. He was sort of jumping up and down over sort of railings onto benches and all sorts of things. And everyone was watching him. Well, I say everyone was watching. Actually, probably everyone was watching him. But what was interesting was the closer people got to him, the less attention they seemed to pay to him. Until you got really close And at one point, there was a man sat on a bench reading his newspaper. This guy jumped up onto the bench right next to him and started whooping in his ear really loud and jumping around and gesticulating. To look at this guy, the guy reading the paper, you would have thought there was absolutely nothing there. He'd completely blanked this guy out. Now, this chap's state of mind was probably sort of chemically altered, or perhaps his mood was induced by overindulgence in alcohol. But what was clear to me was that he also felt that he'd become practically invisible. He'd become disinhibited, and the fact that he could not get any reaction, however he tried, with people was something which was completely disorienting him. About 2 weeks later, I found myself in Stockholm. I'd, by this stage, become sort of quite sort of hardened to being ignored on the streets. I'd had to sort of kind of curb my food intake in order to save money. And by then I'd started noticing that if I walked past a restaurant, I was staring intently at the food on people's plates. On one occasion, I was actually quite tempted to sort of reach out and grab a chip as I went past, but thought better of it. But at this point, I really did need to earn some money. My busking earnings hadn't been nearly as much as I'd hoped they were, and I was getting really worried. I had some CDs with me, and I thought, well, I'm going to start flogging these to the people in the restaurants. Some people bought them. A few people were kind enough to buy more than one. But most people refused. And I started noticing different ways of refusing people. The one was the outstretched palm. Now, that was okay. That was a rejection, but at least it allowed me to perhaps nod politely. My presence had been acknowledged. But the one which was really crushing was the hand up to the side of the face, the palm inwards, flat of the hand outside, not actually paying any attention to the person on the other side, but actually rather shielding your eyes from them. So this was a sort of total denial that anyone was there. Now look, I'm not lacking in confidence. I'm a musician. I'm lucky enough to have my ego regularly stroked by audiences. These things shouldn't have been a problem, but I was amazed actually that I had this sort of kind of, quite strong reaction to it. I felt rejected, frankly, actually, I felt humiliated. And it really made me wonder, what must it be like for a child, perhaps, who has no confidence, has none of the backup that I had, no real skills that they're able to offer to people, and crucially, no hope of ever emerging from that situation. What must it do to them? What would one's reactions be in those situations? How hungry would you need to be before you started stealing? At what stage do you think that going into mugging or prostitution might actually be a good idea? Would you be able to resist drugs if they were offered to you and it made you feel better, even if only for a short time? How much respect would you have from the community that you felt was excluding you? Would you feel angry? And of course, most important of all, would you be prepared to play by the rules of the society which you felt you weren't part of? Now, we struggle, I think, to discuss social exclusion in a detailed way. The riots of August 2011, I think, were deeply shocking and troubling to us all. Now, it's certainly a moot point whether feelings of social exclusion were the trigger to those riots. But what's clear is there's absolutely no consensus on what the root cause was. The criminal activity is probably easier to explain. It seems likely that it was just sheer opportunism which gave people a chance to get their hands on some gear which they couldn't afford. But that doesn't explain all the destruction that profited no one and seemed to be motivated by something much more troubling. In a way, we were all more comfortable with the image of somebody picking their way through broken glass carrying a 52-inch plasma screen than we were by the images of a growing crowd of young people confronting lines of embattled policemen. Now, the purpose of my busking trip, as well as seeing if I could actually do it, was to raise money for music educations for underprivileged children in developing countries. There's a huge amount of evidence pointing to the fantastic benefits that music education can bring to children, particularly children who are in the lowest socioeconomic group. There's all sorts of wonderful data about, well, numeracy, literacy, admissions to higher education, better mental health, fewer problems with drug and alcohol dependency in later life. But my interest is actually in reintegrating children who've had a difficult start to life into their communities. You know, when you want to learn to play an instrument, the first thing is, of course, to get your hands on one. Now, you can beg, buy, borrow one, or if you're really desperate, you can steal it. But that doesn't really help you very much if you want to learn to play it. There's only one way of playing an instrument, and that is to put in the time and effort. It doesn't matter whether you're a boy or girl, whether your parents are rich or poor, where you come from. The main determining factor is what you are prepared to do, whether you've got the perseverance to and the tenaciousness to actually carry on and go through the process. There's no pretense possible. You can't fake it. You can either play or you can't play. And I believe that that gives those children a real sense of not only equality, but of integrity as well. The other thing that we see is how quickly those children develop their own sense of identity. And it's not only that they come from a chaotic environment where they're absolutely nobody and they suddenly discover that, well, I'm a trumpeter, I'm a drummer, something like this. But there's another thing, is that they see that other people give them an identity as well. People that might have previously seen those kids as nothing but a nuisance start to see them as musicians. They see them not as a problem, but one of the solutions for the future. If you visit any music project for underdeveloped children, I guarantee you will meet some of the most ambitious young people that you have ever met. I know people who have started out on the streets and have become lawyers, teachers, and musicians. I know others who want to be engineers, nurses, journalists, and pilots. These are young people that don't just want to be part of society, they want to shape it. And they want to improve their communities for the better. Their communities cannot afford to do without their talents. I started out by playing a piece by one of the giants of European culture, Johann Sebastian Bach. There is another way to describe him. When he was a child, his mother died when he was 9 years old. A year later, his father died. At 12, he walked over 200 miles to take a place at a school which had offered him a scholarship. Any music history book will tell you that he had 20 children. They tend to gloss over the fact that half of those children died before reaching adulthood. He lost his first wife to an easily curable disease, and later in life, as his eyesight faded, he underwent eye surgery performed by a quack doctor. Some 6 months later, he died of septicemia, most likely triggered by the treatment that followed the operation. By our modern standards, Bach lived a life of real deprivation. Yet, what he proves to me is that a difficult start in life need be no barrier to intellectual, creative, and spiritual development. He could have so easily been one of those children that fell through the net, but he was lucky to have a support network around him. Had Bach not had that, it would have been a tragedy for him, of course, but can you imagine how incalculable the loss for the rest of us would have been?